Around 7:20 p.m. on December 11, 2002, a police department in the rural English county of Surrey began getting frantic emergency calls. All of these calls were now coming from cars on the congested A3. They were all saying the same thing, that they had witnessed a completely reckless driver flashing his headlights, swerving in and out of traffic at high speeds and nearly colliding with people. A handful of callers stated they witnessed the automobile go down the embankment off the side of the road and that it had crashed into the trees below. So after receiving these reports, the police department decided to dispatch a couple of officers to investigate. When the two cops arrived on the A3 and began patrolling in the area where all of the reports indicated that they had spotted where the car had left the road, they did not see the driver. They found no evidence of an accident. If only one person had called in about this crazy driving, the authorities would write it up as a mistake or possibly a prank call at this point in the inquiry. But with so many people reporting this one reckless motorist on the A3, the two cops decided to keep looking to see if they could figure out where this driver went. So far, the two police officers have been driving up and down the A3 looking for this driver. So now they decided to leave their patrol vehicles parked and continue their search on foot. Surrey is one of the most densely forested areas in England, and the A3 was no exception, with extensive woods on both sides of the road. The officers reasoned that if this driver was driving as carelessly as all of the callers said, they might have just driven off the road and smashed into this woodland, thereby disappearing from view from the road. In that instance, in order to view this crash, you'd need to be in the forest. As a result, these two officers pulled over, got out, and began walking along the highway, staring into the forest for signs of a car collision. After a period of walking, one of the officers noticed something deep in the woods that appeared nearly metallic or plastic. Whatever it wasn't supposed to be in a forest, so the two officers walked into the tree line, hacking down thick brambles along the way. As they came closer, they noticed that there was, indeed, a car, a heavily damaged one. The officers made their way toward it, radioing for help. They arrive at this wreck in the middle of the woods. They look into the driver's side and notice that there is no driver. They looked through the passenger window and noticed that the passenger door was wide open and that there was a body on the ground on the other side of the car. So the two cops went around the car to get a better look at the body, and when they did, they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. It didn't make any sense. To understand why these cops were taken aback and perplexed, we must go back 5 months to July 16, 2002. Christopher Chandler, 21, was finishing his pint in a pub in West London, roughly an hour north of this stretch of the A3 in Surrey. Christopher had gone into this pub with a close friend that night. This was supposed to be a great night out. But as he sipped his beer, he began to feel uneasy about being there, as Christopher was wanted by police in London for robbery, and he did not like to hang around in one spot for too long. As a result, the only people who knew where Christopher was were his friend at the pub and his brother. So finally, Christopher became so concerned about being in this pub for too long and being recognized that he informed his friend that he just wanted to leave. They said their goodbyes and Christopher drove south in his car. However, Christopher never arrived at his destination. He simply vanished, and no one ever heard from him again. Christopher's brother would finally report him missing. But keep in mind that the brother is aware that Christopher is wanted for robbery, and therefore would often suddenly vanish for periods at a time. This was nothing out of the ordinary, so his brother didn't think it was a big problem. And the police would feel the same way because they know Christopher is going to elude them, so it makes sense that he would go missing from time to time. As a result, no one investigated Christopher's missing persons complaint. That is, until 5 months later, when all of these drivers start calling Surrey police about this completely reckless driver screaming down the A3 at horrific speeds, finally crashing off the road and into a ditch. That brings us back to the two officers. They proceeded to that part of the A3 and there was Christopher's car, as well as Christopher's body on the ground. But there's a twist to this tale. When those two officers approached Christopher's car for the first time, they were startled by how old it appeared. It didn't register at first because it was just an old automobile with a lot of rust. When they went around and looked at the body on the ground, they noticed that Christopher's body was badly decomposed and skeletal-like, indicating that he did not crash and die on December 11, 2002. How could somebody vanish from a pub in July only to crash his car 5 months later in December? Seen by several witnesses, and whose body shows the decomposition of somebody who died months earlier. Surrey police said that this must have been a huge coincidence, and that the reckless driver that people were reporting on the A3 that night had managed to keep going and somehow evaded the authorities. They claimed it must have been a coincidence that whilst they were out searching the area, they stumbled across Christopher's crash, which must have happened earlier in the year. But several drivers who had reported the reckless driver specifically said they saw the car veer off the road, burst down the embankment, and crash into the trees. These witnesses even suggested that an ambulance will be needed as this is a serious crash. Somebody will have been hurt or worse. So, what do you think? Did a reckless driver unintentionally point police to a wanted man missing for 5 months? Or did multiple witnesses report Christopher Chandler's ghost?